Before listening to this episode, remember that we are currently selling our token. You and your friends will be able to make part of the Seasteading ecosystem. Visit VARYON.io for more information. And if you want Seasteading to go to your country, we now have a Blue Frontiers global contest with a final prize of $100,000. Make your own Seastead. Visit bluefrontiers.global to win the possibility of bringing a $60 million investment to your city and the chances of hosting our second Seastead.
Hi, I'm Joe Quirk. Welcome to the Blue Frontiers podcast about all my favorite things: seasteading, the environment, special economic zones, and innovation in science, technology, governance, and society itself.
Hello, Seasteaders.
Hello.
I am here with Daniel Nagy, who is an Ethereum developer and also a Blue Frontiers advisor, and also a PhD in information theory with a specific focus on data compression. Right, Daniel?
That's correct.
How are you?
Very good, thank you.
Thank you for coming. Thank you very much for being our guest. We've been looking forward to your podcast for a long time. Yes.
Indeed, it's been a long time.
Tell us a bit about what you did on your PhD.
So that was a long time ago, between 2001 and 2006.
Okay.
And it was in Kingston, Ontario, Canada.
Oh.
And I was working on data compression. So I was particularly interested in how the symbol set that we use to describe information affects its compressibility, and what happens if a compression algorithm is particularly tailored to one symbol set, but then it used on another. So these are the kind of questions that I investigated.
Okay. And this was before or after you joined a company that had a method for finding out what the client was that was reversed from what companies usually do. So usually companies think, okay, I want to have this product or I want to do this, and then they take it out in the market. But you were in a company that did quite the opposite, right? First, they investigated what the client wanted, and then they developed their products. I'm referring about the company that was related to fashion.
Well, that came much later, of course. So that was after I returned to Hungary, and actually many years into that. And no, it is not really related to my PhD topic. Actually, it was during my time as a PhD student that I became interested in cryptography and cryptocurrencies and that kind of stuff. So I did that first, so to speak. And this job as a data scientist with this company, which I like to call fashion industry, that came later, and to some extent I'm still involved with them. So I work one day a week there.
Oh, really?
Indeed.
Oh, I didn't know. Your wife, when we met for the second time in Budapest, she was very happy telling me how you knew what a pencil skirt is. And I found that really, really interesting. So what exactly did this fashion company do with data science?
Well, they are providing recommendation services for customers of online apparel retailers. So that's what the company does. Oh. And the reason it is so specialized on apparel rather than providing general recommendation services is because apparel is very different from many other things that are being sold online. In particular, it is produced in relatively small quantities, so mass production is not as massive as with other kind of things. The lifetime of a fashion product is very short. Things usually sell out within one season, sometimes even faster. And also, typically, the apparel items, they don't have unique global identifiers. Even two different retailers selling the same product may name it differently. So
Okay.
there's no such thing as a product name, so to speak. So it's different. So I don't really want to go into the dark secrets of the fashion industry, but apparel is sufficiently different from other things that are being sold online to merit a specialized company.
Okay, I see. So, Daniel, when we met for the first time, it was in Tahiti in French Polynesia last year, because you went and stayed with us for a while at the Blue Frontiers headquarters that we had there. What attracted you to French Polynesia and to seasteading?
Okay, the first question is easier. It was seasteading that attracted me to French Polynesia.
Yeah.
That's a easy answer. Actually, before going there, I knew almost exactly nothing about French Polynesia, and it was very eye-opening to see a completely new world there.
Yes.
And what attracted me to seasteading is a more complex question, and I think it's more difficult to answer. But the short answer would be the freedom, right? So one of the things that are guiding my life, and basically one of my guiding principles, is to seek and extend freedom. That's something that I really like doing and enjoy doing, and that gives me a sense of purpose.
Yes.
So I'm really attracted to all sorts of freedom-enhancing technologies. I work full-time on Ethereum and on cryptocurrencies in general because that's another freedom-enhancing technology. And
Yes.
seasteading, I see also as a technology that can greatly enhance human freedom. So
Yes.
that's the short answer, what attracts me to seasteading. And I've been following this project for a very, very long time, mostly in a read-only mode. So I was reading the essays of Patrick Friedman, who is the founder of the Seasteading Institute. I found him through his father. So his father is David Friedman.
You kidnapped twice.
Yes.
I know, yeah. I was there last time.
So I've been reading his webpage and his blog for a very long time, more than 20 years now. And one of his books, Machinery of Freedom, was a very transformational experience for me. I really enjoyed reading that book. And following him, I found that his son is doing other things. Mm-hmm. So I was following his blog way back when it was on LiveJournal. It's a blog platform that is not very popular today, but it was very popular 10, 15 years ago. Wow. So I was following Patrick Friedman on LiveJournal, and at some point he started writing about seasteading, and that kind of got me interested. And I've been following the project, and then I noticed that, hey, something is moving here, something is afoot. It's getting practical.
Yes.
And then one of the founders of Blue Frontiers, Yegor Rizhikov, he invited me to French Polynesia, although I was sort of hoping to meet him there, but
here I am. He wasn't there. Well, but you met some other team members.
Oh, yes.
I also remember when we were there. So you have an airplane and you love to fly, and you mentioned how you would like to have an airplane that would turn into a boat. How do you see your life on a seastead in the future, besides flying? And
aviation is a hobby of mine, so I'm not a professional pilot. I'm just a hobby pilot. I'm flying an ultralight airplane mostly for fun. And there is a lot of development in that area as well. So it's also a field of technology that is undergoing rapid development as we speak. There are always new models of small aircraft coming out, and there are new technologies that make them more performant, more available, more more practical in many ways. And the small seaplanes is something that is also being developed now in the 21st century. And that is something I would love to play with on a seastead.
Wow. Even the name sounds so cool, a seaplane. Wow, I love it. Well, I hope one day to jump on your seaplane to go from shore to the seastead, any seastead, to a seastead.
Well, I'm hoping to be able to do that.
Yeah. And do you need a special? Yeah. What?
I'm very much looking forward to it.
And can you use the same license that you use for a normal airplane, or do you need to go through different regulations?
So the license is the same, but you need an extra rating for seaplanes. So it's an additional rating on your license. In aviation, you get a license, and then you can add various ratings to that license.
Okay.
Like night rating, instrument rating, and seaplane rating is one of those.
Oh, I didn't know that. But you must know very well, because I know that you struggle really annoyingly with the regulations of countries when it comes to aviation. Sometimes, especially when they're really silly. No?
Right. So aviation is one of the most heavily regulated industries out there.
Really?
So if you really want to see a lot of bureaucracy, then you should look into aviation. It's all very, very regulated for both good reasons and bad. But one of the things that I'm looking forward to in a seastead is to have regulations that are more user-friendly and more tailored to the actual people who live there. So one of the problems that seasteading is going to solve, in my opinion, is that in large countries, and even the smallest, well, not the smallest ones, but even small countries are way too large, in the sense that many people who have very little in common and have different interests are doing different things. They're forced to live under the same rules. And, these rules are not one size fits all, indeed. So different people need different rules. And I think that in a seastead, where people kind of congregate by shared interests, shared values, shared lifestyle choices, and so on, it is entirely reasonable to expect regulations that much better match the needs of people who live on that seastead. And aviation is one of those areas where I'm very looking forward to regulations that better suit my needs. So, for example, seaplanes as such are completely and entirely illegal in Hungary, the country in which I live. There's no such thing as a seaplane. It's illegal to land and take off from water.
Really?
So in Hungary, this is not an option. So if I want to undergo training, I would need to go to either Croatia or to Slovenia or to Italy.
Wow.
So that's just one example of aviation regulations being not suited for everybody who lives under the same jurisdiction.
Yeah. I remember you were changing the country where you have registered your license to another one that is not Hungary because of the bureaucracy that is involved.
Exactly. So I have recently registered my airplane in Slovakia because Slovakia seems to be much more friendly to ultralight aviation. So they are much more forthcoming with many things. Again, this is details that maybe will bore our viewers, but suffice to say that owning a Slovakian ultralight airplane is much easier than owning a Hungarian one.
Okay. Oh, are you still here?
I am.
Okay. I got a message on my screen. So in which other aspects do you see that seasteading will extend the freedom in general?
Well, I think that many words have been written about this topic already, so maybe I will repeat myself and other people. But I think the most important ones are the freedom to choose with whom you live. That's very important. Freedom of movement.
Yes.
Also, I think that if there are going to be many seasteads with many jurisdictions, different rules on each seastead, then it will create a healthy competition and the incentive to develop better governance systems, and maybe it would also incentivize governments on land to be, more customer friendly, because otherwise their population would just escape to the sea, because there's more place in water than there is on land. So hopefully it would have a beneficial effect on freedom of even those people who would never live on a seastead. Also, in some ways, it extends freedom even in a physical sense, because at the current level of human technology, the cheapest means of transportation is by sea. So it is easiest to transport goods in containers by ships. And this means that usually coastal countries, they tend to be better connected to the world economy than like inland countries and landlocked countries. And seasteads are not landlocked. Seasteads are right there in the sea. They have access to all benefits of maritime trade. And as far as I know, even the very first seastead that is going to be in the territorial waters of French Polynesia, it will already be granted exemptions from customs duties, so people could trade customs-free and duty-free by sea, and I think that's great. That's something that makes it a very attractive proposition.
Yeah, definitely. How about in terms of, and connecting it back to your career? So you work on encryption and decentralized storage, and
Correct.
you've been working on it for a while now. I know that you were unfairly accused, or you had an unfair criminal investigation due to the most silly thing in the world, which is piracy or file sharing.
Right. So, especially in the context of seasteading, I think we should clearly distinguish between piracy, which is attacking ships and other things on the high seas, and file sharing, which is something entirely different. And even if you look into the criminal codes of any country, you will not find piracy there in connection with file sharing. Actually, it's called copyright infringement. And I think that calling copyright infringement piracy is very disingenuous, and it is used to connect associations in people's brains which are not entirely accurately describing the world as it is. So I prefer not to use piracy for file sharing. We will have to deal, and hopefully we will not even have to deal with real piracy on the seastead, but that is something. Okay, so copyright infringement. Indeed, I had a criminal investigation running against me when I was accused of abetting criminal copyright infringement by hosting a file sharing hub on my server. It was a very unpleasant experience. I don't wish anyone to ever have it, and I'm very glad that it's behind me. But it has demonstrated to me the importance of technical measures of protecting online freedom and online piracy.
Yes.
Privacy, sorry.
Online.
because so these things, so this is an ongoing battle. I think it is a battle that freedom is winning. So right now the situation is much better than it was back then, about 10 years ago. And it's getting even better. But the reason it is getting better is because of the, I should say, overwhelming technical superiority on the side of freedom.
Yes.
So we already have decentralized networks like BitTorrent. And I really think that BitTorrent does deserve the Economic Nobel Prize. So this is the first decentralized peer-to-peer network that had a very careful consideration of incentives built into it. And after its introduction, for many years, BitTorrent accounted for more than half of all of internet traffic. And I think it's still in double digits in terms of percentage, like 1/5 or something like that. So it's still over 10% of all internet traffic.
Wow.
So it's a very successful network.
Wow.
But it's already showing its age, and there are some things for which it is just not suited. So BitTorrent is not suitable for responsive web applications, for example, because you don't want web pages to be as slow as BitTorrent when it starts. So BitTorrent generally has a great throughput. You can download megabytes and gigabytes through it very fast. But the first few kilobytes come very slowly. So it starts very slow, and there are reasons for that. There are fundamental reasons for that. And therefore, BitTorrent is not good for hypertext and web applications and things like that. So you would never see BitTorrent replacing the World Wide Web. So the things that I'm working on, and in particular, it's the Swarm subsystem of Ethereum. It is taking all the best from both worlds. So it will have decentralization and censorship resistance and high throughput similar to BitTorrent, but it will be responsive and fast and intuitive the same way as the World Wide Web currently works. So that's why actually we're calling this set of technologies Web3, because that will be a third iteration of World Wide Web.
And I know that you have a very strong critique towards Web 2.0.
I do.
Please?
So originally in the mid-90s, when the World Wide Web really took off and people started using it, it started as a decentralized system. There were many web servers, and in order to create a blog or a homepage or something like that, you typically started your own server, or you just rented one from a big multitude of competing providers. So it was a highly decentralized system, but it had one crucial flaw. Namely, two things happened in rapid succession if your particular content became popular. The first thing that happened was that your traffic charges skyrocketed because everybody was using the traffic of your server. And shortly after that, your server would crash. Those were the rewards for popularity on Web 1. So there was even a name for it, the Slashdot effect. So if you got a mention on some popular blog like Slashdot, and people clicked on the link to your homepage, then exactly. So
okay.
First, you had to pay a lot of money, and then your service became unavailable.
Okay.
And there were two ways to address this. They came roughly at the same time. One of them was Web 2, and the other one was BitTorrent. So BitTorrent solved the server problem in a decentralized fashion. So it solved the bottleneck problem by utilizing the upstream bandwidth of the downloaders. So everybody who downloaded some part also uploaded the same part to those who are downloading some other part, and people would swap the information among each other. So that's the solution of the BitTorrent to the bottleneck problem. But the other solution was Web 2, which was basically building large data centers and using economies of scale to serve content from these big data centers. And that meant that if you wanted to host some content that had the chance of becoming very popular, then you would typically give your data, your content to one of those Web2 companies like Google or Facebook or Amazon or one of those. And then you kind of entered into a Faustian bargain, because from that point on, you lost control over your content. So it was from that point on, this company's control over your content, which means that they could use it for advertising, they could data mine the analytics for the benefit of their customers, not you. They could also select to whom they show your content, to whom they don't. They could exercise censorship and so on. So basically it turned the originally decentralized web into a very centralized infrastructure. And I think that the HTTP protocol as such cannot really be scaled in a different way. So in order to overcome the limitations of Web 2, we need to move away from the HTTP protocol and use something else. And that's what I'm developing with my colleagues at Ethereum.
Okay, in Swarm. I like the name. In order to avoid, so that is the reason why you send 4 kilobytes of data?
Mm-hmm.
What is the reason behind? Actually, can you explain what Swarm is for our listeners, viewers?
So Swarm is a peer-to-peer network for storing and retrieving information, typically web content or databases. And it is inspired by BitTorrent in that data is split up into small chunks. You mentioned this 4 kilobyte size, which is in a way just an arbitrary number.
Okay.
We chose for reasons that are not really fundamental to the working of Swarm. So it chunks up data to these small chunks. That's how we call them.
Yes.
And stores them in a distributed fashion in such a way that each chunk is stored in a large number of nodes, but not every node. So in that way, it differs from blockchains or current blockchains like first and second generation blockchains like Bitcoin or Ethereum, where each piece of data of the blockchain is stored on every full node, and that becomes a scaling bottleneck.
Yes.
So Swarm does not have that limitation. Not every Swarm node stores every data, but every piece of data is stored on a large number of nodes. And actually, the more popular some content becomes, the more nodes would actually store and relay it.
Okay.
And also similarly to BitTorrent, incentives to participate and to behave in a beneficial way to the network are considered. So if you are sharing your storage and your bandwidth resources with the network, you're going to get compensated for it, either with better service or with actual payment. So we have this wonderful transaction network called Ethereum, where in addition to bartering services or bartering information the way BitTorrent does, we can also use the benefits of a money system, which is kind of the next step after barter, when you don't have this requirement for the coincidence of once. Basically, you get credited for providing service in the past that you can claim sometimes in the future. If you just need ethers, then you could plug in your computer and wait for people who are going to use your hard drive and your network connection, and they're going to pay you, and so on. So basically, you will be able to rent out your storage capacity, or on the other hand, you will also be able to rent other people's storage capacity. So basically, at your fingertips on your smartphone, you will be able to access huge databases which are not necessarily stored or even backed up on your smartphone.
So like
So
a virtual machine on your smartphone.
well, you do have a powerful machine on your smartphone, but still it's much more limited than a data center or a large peer-to-peer network. And also, your network connection is expensive not only in terms of money, which is getting cheaper, but in terms of battery life. So if you are using a lot of bandwidth on your phone, then the first thing that will happen is that your battery will run dry soon.
Yes.
And you don't want that to happen.
Nope.
So on a cell phone, instead of providing reciprocal service, you would rather pay, which is what people typically do. They pay for it. So people are used for paying for mobile data. That's not a problem.
Yeah, that makes sense. And yeah, as the name says, a mobile, you need to carry it from one place to another. So the requirements are different from if you have a static computer.
Exactly. And you can have different modes of operation for when you're plugged into a charger and when you're not. So basically, if you're plugged in and you're connected to a Wi-Fi, then you maybe can afford trading for services, and in that case, you don't need to pay for access because you're paying with your connectivity.
I love that.
But then you're plugged into a charger and you don't care about the battery. So it will be flexible and it won't be expensive.
How is this connected with the long-term plans that Ethereum, for example, has of becoming the platform to run decentralized applications with humans and machines running there?
Right. So most decentralized applications would need large amounts of data stored somewhere. So the typical dumbed down explanation is that if Ethereum is the world's computer, then Swarm is the world's hard drive. So Swarm is where you store large amounts of data, because storing large amounts of data in the blockchain is very, very expensive, precisely because in the blockchain, everything needs to be ordered, everything needs to be replicated to every node, and so on. So storing everything in the Ethereum blockchain is hopelessly expensive, but Swarm can store in a reliable and trustworthy way large amounts of information and have them retrieved also reliably and fast. And because of that, it will enable to store both part of the program code of the decentralized applications, but also their data. And actually, in a twist of roles, one of the ways of scaling Ethereum is to store part of the blockchain in Swarm as well. So if Swarm becomes as reliable and as usable as we want it to be, then actually we can turn things around and store even blockchain data in Swarm, so that not every node would have to store everything, but it will be stored with a reasonable redundancy. But that's a few years away in the future.
Yes. Hopefully, yes. And how does this impact privacy compared to what we have? What are the difference in terms of privacy?
Well, there are two important parts of privacy. One is storing private information, for which the solution is encryption, which Swarm does support. So if you want to store your personal data on Swarm, even though it is stored on completely random strangers' computers, you can be sure that they will store it, but they will not be able to read it and interpret it.
And they don't have information.
For me?
They just have bits, little chunks of information.
Exactly. They have random bits. They have chunks of random information which they cannot decrypt. They don't even know which chunks belong together, and so on. And the other part of privacy is to protect attribution, so that if you publish something, then you can do so anonymously. That's another aspect of privacy.
Yes.
Currently, we're placing less emphasis on that in Swarm because we feel that we see that in theory it can be solved further down the road. And if it becomes an issue, we have several tricks in the hat, which we will in due order. So if it becomes an arms race, then we're going to win that arms race, no question. But currently, this is less of a priority because first it needs to work, and when it works reliably, then we can add layers of darkness if required and as required.
Yeah, I understand. What applications do you see, or what uses do you see for decentralized applications on any aspect of seasteading and how either we transact or we govern?
Well, I think that there's a large scope for decentralized applications on seasteads. So I think that living on a seastead is an exploratory activity. So we will be trying new things and experimenting with new things. And basically that means that we're going, all of us, all of the people who are going to live on seasteads, they're going to produce and gather a lot of data.
Yes.
And in order to make that data useful, in order to systematize that data, we can go down two roads. Either we go down the centralized road, that there will be some kind of master server and some master repository of all this data that we collect, and then it will make it more vulnerable and also less freedom supporting. Or we can go down the decentralized path, that we all store each other's data with sufficient redundancy, and whenever somebody needs to look something up that somebody else has collected, then there will be this decentralized infrastructure that will help them. So I think that we're going to be needing to map our environment, to produce, accurate maps of the seafloor, of the currents. We would need to gather meteorological data. We would probably monitor our own health, and in that case, a right balance of privacy and availability is crucial. But basically, it will be almost like astronauts, that we will need to write down everything that we do and find out what works and what doesn't work, and use the scientific method to find suitable ways of living in the high seas. So I'm looking forward to it as a exploratory activity when lots of different things will be tried. Some of them will not work out, others will work out, and then if something works, then everybody would need to have access to that information. We would need to collect statistics in order to data mine them, in order to find out why some people are feeling bad, what needs to be changed in nutrition perhaps, or sunlight, or whatever. And in order to answer these kind of questions, we would need to collect humongous amount of data. And I think that on a seastead, we better do it in a decentralized fashion.
Yes. Well, it goes in parallel with the ethos of seasteading. It wouldn't make sense to have a seastead, or a few, which are all about decentralizing governance as it exists right now, and then storing the data like national authorities want to do today?
Oh, of course, property registries or metric records, births, deaths, marriages, those kind of things, they definitely will be very well suited for blockchain-based decentralized systems.
Yeah.
Who owns what, who lives where, who rents what from somebody else. So there will be, I think that there are going to be some non-trivial relationships of ownership and usage and renting and sub-renting and
Yes.
timeshare and whatnot. So all that is going to happen, and it needs to be administered somewhere. And I think that decentralized blockchain-based systems are very well suited for that purpose because they provide a non-alterable, immutable record.
Yeah.
And they also provide accessibility, transaction correctness, and all the kind of things that we need for such services.
Exactly. One of the partners of Blue Frontiers, they are called New Hands Network, and they are designing a SOM protocol for land registration on the blockchain, but where each one of the layers, from the charter to the property owners to the ones who rent, will benefit economically from the land, or in this case, Seastead, increasing value of the platforms by putting a non-fungible token on top of a utility token. So, and also there are just so many applications. When I was preparing for your podcast, I saw that even Kodak is creating a platform so that people pay photographers on their platforms. It's called something like Kodak Coin. It's not just a currency; it's an actual platform.
Mm-hmm.
There's gonna be so many uses. You should remarry.
Right. Right now, there's a boom of blockchain-based applications. Most of them will fail, we know that. But,
That's fine.
out of millions of experiments, even if thousands become usable and hundreds become daily parts of our lives, it would be amazing, right?
Yeah. Yes.
So I think that in this, wild frenzy of experimentation, it's perfectly normal that there's tons of solutions for every problem, and most of those solutions are wrong. We know that.
Yes.
But precisely it is the freedom of experimentation and of not being forced to use something that does not properly work that will result in an evolutionary process that will select what works.
Exactly. I like that you mentioned that word, because nature, if you look back, is full of failed attempts. Even at the very, very beginning of life, there are historical records of, in Australia especially, many failed nature experiments of snakes with two heads, spiders with two heads, a lot of failed experiment that just didn't pass the evolutionary tests of time. But anyway, if you look back, you would see that most of the life that exists right now is just a tiny little fraction of every single thing that has existed so far. So in order to not reach an optimal, but at least to reach a satisfactory good level of whatever, improvement of whatever, you need a lot of failed attempts. And I like to think that we already have enough experience in a lot of failed human social experiments, like the current governments that we already have, that we kind of have an idea of how to improve it, how to improve them. And with blockchain-based applications and technologies, I definitely see that we are going in the right direction. What would you say to people who say or who are waiting for the crypto bubble to pop? What would be, to explode?
Well, so it will happen. Maybe it will happen more than once.
Yeah.
So there will be booms and busts. So far the experience has been that even after a particular bubble bursting, then things will not get back to where they were before the bubble. So if you remember the internet bubble in the late 90s and early 2000s, of course it was a huge bubble, it burst, but the world has fundamentally changed. So now the world in which we live is not the world of the early 90s without the World Wide Web. So it left us a lot of really useful things, and the value of the things that were created during the bubble is still enormous. It's not as high as the people in the bubble expected it to be, but it's still huge. And I think that it's similar with crypto assets and blockchain technologies as well. That there will be definitely there are going to be busts, because right now the expectations are stellar and everybody wants everything to happen now. And if you listen to all these pitches, then salvation is just around the corner. And of course, doing these things in reality takes time, takes experimentation, and some of that experimentation will inevitably fail. So things usually happen slower than the optimistic investors expect. And when reality and expectations are no longer compatible with each other, they are no longer reconcilable, then asset prices tend to fall. And I think that will happen probably more than once. But nevertheless, the things that have been built during the bubble times, the best things, they will last and they will be immensely valuable. So I think that fundamental developments, of which the first one was Bitcoin, but also Ethereum and many others, will be immensely valuable, even if their peak valuations will not be sustained forever.
Yes, I like to think that VARYON, our token in Blue Frontiers, the Seasteading token, is the next one, like Bitcoin, then Ethereum, and now we are working on the VARYON. And you are actually advising us a lot in the design of our token.
Right. So, well, I would be a little bit more modest. I would not put VARYON in the same line as Bitcoin or Ethereum. So VARYON is still a special purpose technology, whereas especially Ethereum is a general purpose technology. And both have their place under the sun. But I think that seasteading might also experience a bubble, not just VARYON, the token, but also seasteading as a movement. So there might be a lot of capital flowing into seasteading, and there will be many technologies and things developed and actually physically built. And some of them might turn out to be not as valuable as people initially thought. Yes. And then we can have this boom and bust cycle. But I still believe that whatever is going to be built, some of that, the most valuable of that, will survive any bust. And if we do VARYON right, then VARYON would also survive bubbles and booms and busts. But we need to work hard for that.
Yes.
Because busts are usually big extinction events. So we would need to be good.
Yes. No, we will. We are right now revisiting our white paper in order to comply more with what people want. So in the next weeks, months, I don't know when this podcast is going to be aired, hopefully soon, but we are going to come out with a more, how would you call it? A very interesting token design?
Well, it is a unique token design, I think, because so my general policy before VARYON was to invest in so-called internet-only projects. So projects where everything that is being done is done on the internet, is done online. I never invested into anything that that has anything to do with the physical reality. And the reason for that policy was that linking the physical world with these technologies was somewhat remote. So we haven't figured out ways to do that. There are no blueprints, there are no best practices, there are no well-trodden paths about financing physical developments on the blockchain. And I think that VARYON is a very promising pioneering project in that respect. And I'm very honored to be able to advise it. And I'm really honored that Blue Frontiers invited me as an advisor. But because it kind of, in a way, it's also my baby in the sense that it incorporates some of the ideas that I'm giving. This is the first blockchain project that has something to do with the physical reality in which I'm actually investing.
That's very nice. That is very, actually, even sweet. What do you think of projects that want to tokenize natural assets, for example?
Well, it's hard. So there's no known obvious way to do it. And I think that maybe with VARYON, we can actually provide a model for others to emulate. But the projects that I've seen so far, they were unconvincing.
Okay.
Because this is something that we need to learn. Like, this is not something that generations have done in the past, and we just need to take the best practices and use them, right? This is something that needs to be invented. And I think that's what people at Blue Frontiers, including advisors like me, are doing. So we're blazing the trail.
And it's really meaningful that the place where the first Seasteading related token is taking place, it's in the Pacific, where old trading systems were invented. Can you tell us a bit about the story of money and stones? I forgot the name of the community in the Pacific that used to store ownership on symbolically in stones. But I know you know
right.
very well.
So one of the direct inspirations for Bitcoin was the so-called rice stones of the Yap archipelago. So it's in Micronesia. It's quite far from French Polynesia, but in the Pacific, everything is far from everything. Actually, one of the most staggering experiences of visiting French Polynesia was to get a real sense of how immense and huge the Pacific is. Basically, it's one half of the world. It's the other half to which we have never paid attention. Yes. So in most of the maps, be they Europe-centric or America-centric or Asia-centric, the Pacific is just a footnote. It's somewhere on the edges. And it's that big blue part. So you can draw a map of the Pacific. If you put the Pacific in the middle, then there's all these tiny islands, which we call continents, which are on the rim. And the middle of it is all blue, right? So, but anyhow, so Yap is a archipelago in Micronesia, which is to the west of French Polynesia, about 8,000 kilometers to the west. So it's quite far.
Yes.
But nevertheless, it's also a volcanic archipelago, similar to the Society Islands, where French Polynesia is located. And the Aboriginal people living there used these limestone rocks, the rice stones, which were big circular rocks with a hole in the middle, as money. because limestone is not available on the archipelago. So in order to get limestone, they needed to embark on costly and dangerous expeditions in their outrigger canoes.
Mhm.
And presenting a physical rock was actually proof of risk and work. And they would use this proof of risk and work as the basis of their monetary system, which actually is not, we're talking in past tense, but the rhinestone system is still in use. So for big ticket items, you can still use, they're still in use. So it's a monetary system that has been around for about 500 years, 5 centuries, half a millennium. And for expensive things like a motorboat or a wife, they're still using them.
Wow.
And for example, when the museum in New Zealand wanted to purchase one of these stones for display, they actually had to pay the market price for it because it's, it's currency. It still has value as currency and they're still using it. But it is true that it was one of the direct inspirations for Bitcoin and by extension, all the blockchain revolution, because it is also a decentralized system where payment is done purely informationally. So they don't actually carry these stones around. What they do in order to transact with stones is that they tell each other stories. And they recite the story of each of these rocks, which is basically a regularly repeated record of transaction history, and basically that is what inspired the blockchain.
My office mate just finished his PhD he did it about Bitcoin, and he told me that once one of these fall to the ocean, it was a fjord or a cliff. It fell from a cliff to the ocean, but it was there. People knew it was there, so they were still counting it. I mean, they just
Again, you're using past tense, but actually they still are.
That one.
So that stone down on the ocean floor, it still has owners.
Oh my cosmos, that
There
is
are people who claim to be the rightful owners of that rock. And they still transact with it. You can pay with it.
Wow, I'm getting surprised.
I mean, you can because you don't own it, but those who own it, they use it for payment.
That's amazing. And I shouldn't be amazed by it because the reality or the materiality of this stone is probably even a bit more real than how we see that paper money today. Right?
Well, in many ways it is. And it has been more stable than any paper money system that we know. So there still isn't a single paper money system that has survived for 2 centuries, let alone 5.
Whoa.
So it has some things going for it.
Yes. Wow. And Daniel, one final question about our token. And it's, why should someone buy VARYON? Or why should someone get involved in the Blue Frontiers Seasteading ecosystem?
Well, I think fundamentally there can be 2 reasons for this. Either because they want to participate in it, so they want to move on a seastead, or they want to provide services for seasteads and so on. So they want to become part of the seastead economy. And in that case, the reason why they should buy VARYON now is that as more and more of these things materialize, then the total value of VARYON is bound to go up. It will become more expensive as people would actually need it, not just for the expectations of the future, but actually to do things on the seastead. So if somebody counts on the success of this project and they want to have VARYON, they should buy it now rather than later, because later it will become more expensive. Or the second reason is that they don't want to participate in this economy, but they believe that the people who are participating in it are going to be successful with it. And in that case, they can buy VARYONs now so that they can sell to those people later. So these are the two reasons.
Both are great reasons. I'm sold. I'm gonna buy VARYON. I will, Daniel. Thank you very much for having been a very interesting guest of our podcast and for all the inputs you are providing for the design of our token and ever since you got involved by being an advisor of Blue Frontiers.
Well, thank you for inviting me.
Thanks for joining us on the Blue Frontiers podcast. To learn more about our work and find out how you can support the project, visit blue-frontiers.com or visit our social channels. You can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter at Blue Frontiers, or shoot us a note via our website. If you learned something and enjoyed the show, tell a friend or leave us a positive review on iTunes or wherever you're listening. Don't forget to subscribe to our show and remember to join us for the next episode.